Western intelligence issued no official warning to alert aviation security officials to Al-Qaeda's new deadly tactic. Standard airport security technology had so far failed to stop Abdulmutallab. But he still faced a second system of safeguards, security documentation designed to ensure only genuine passengers can board planes. At 8:35 p.m, Abdulmutallab presented his passport. It held a US visa granted 18 months earlier when he'd been at college in London. He cannot board a US flight without it. If he had subsequently come under suspicion, the US authorities might have revoked it, stopping his mission in its tracks. Abdulmutallab's visa was still valid, and he was allowed to continue his journey. There was nothing in Abdulmutallab's prestigious Nigerian background to suggest he might be a suicide bomber in the making. The young man's journey towards jihad appears to have begun 4 years earlier while he was studying engineering in London.
He was the head of an Islamic society at his university. At the same time as Abdulmutallab was getting more and more deeper into his studies of Islam, he also was expressing on internet sites how lonely he was and how isolated he felt. It's the kind of recipe for someone who could get caught up in the kind of extremist views.
Abdulmutallab seems to have been the perfect operative. Here was a clean skin, somebody who wasn't known to the intelligence community.
They're looking for people who may not look like the typical operatives that Al-Qaeda has relied on in the past, and who can operate pretty easily in Western societies.
In 2008, he left London to continue his studies in Dubai. Then he abandoned the course and traveled across the Middle East. His destination was Yemen. One of the poorest countries in the region, it's been plagued by civil war and weak government. By 2009, it had become a crucible for Al-Qaeda terrorism.
Yemen has always been a haven for Al-Qaeda. It's the ancestral home for Osama bin Laden. You've really had a witch's brew of problems in Yemen that has allowed Al-Qaeda to take deeper root.
Matthew Salmon came to Yemen to learn Arabic. He didn't realize that one of his fellow students was an Al-Qaeda suicide bomber in the making.
My first impression of him was that he was a very gentle individual. He was very soft-spoken, but very friendly as well. He never talked about his past. He inferred that when he had lived in Western societies, he was uncomfortable.
One day in September 2009, Abdulmutallab simply disappeared.
I had noticed that he had left. He had left without saying goodbye to any of the students. And we all found it strange that he had left without saying goodbye to us or telling us where he was going.
While in Yemen, it's believed that Abdulmutallab came into contact with notorious extremist cleric Anwar al-Awlaki.
The reach of Anwar al-Awlaki is vast, and he is like the siren song for many Westerners seeking a radicalized path within Islam.
One of al-Awlaki's disciples was US Army psychiatrist Major Malik Hassan, who shot dead 13 people at Fort Hood military base in Texas. Hassan had exchanged 18 emails with al-Awlaki, who also had links to the 9/11 bombers. Al-Awlaki has denied any role in Abdulmutallab's Christmas Day attack. Abdulmutallab had dropped off the radar, but nobody suspected that he had joined the ranks of Al-Qaeda. Except for one man, his father.
In November 2009, Abdulmutallab's father entered the U.S. Embassy in Abuja. He was concerned about his son, that his son was growing more and more radical, and that he was falling in with the wrong crowd and had traveled to Yemen.
His dad is the chairman of a very big bank in Nigeria, and so this is not like just nobody coming in from the street. He's someone that the officials there respect and take a warning quite seriously.
The embassy sent a warning, called a Visa Viper, to the National Counterterrorism Center in McLean, Virginia. Analysts there established Abdulmutallab had a visa allowing him to travel to the US. But it was decided that his father's concerns were not enough to revoke it.
That kind of report comes in, dozens of times a day, maybe even hundreds of times a day from different places across the world. It was a single thread. It was alone, in isolation. It was enough to essentially do almost nothing other than to put it into the system.
Experts believe the intelligence should have prompted further investigation.
The father was a prominent individual in Nigeria, and he used some important words like radicalization, Yemen, things that should have triggered further scrutiny, but it wasn't highlighted. There wasn't diligence done.
Nobody took ownership of that single fact and started asking those pertinent questions of the other agencies within US government.
Abdulmutallab arrives in Schiphol just around dawn. It's 5:37 a.m. Now it's Christmas Day.
After a journey of 11 hours, Abdulmutallab is now within sight of his final objective: to get on board Flight 253 to Detroit and take down the plane and everybody on board. But Amsterdam's Schiphol airport is where Abdulmutallab's murderous plan is most likely to fall apart. It is one of the world's biggest and busiest hubs, handling on average 1,100 flights a day.
Abdulmutallab, as he makes his journey from Africa and Ghana to Nigeria to Amsterdam on his way to the United States, is passing into bigger and bigger airports. And in fact, he's passing into more sophisticated security systems. In Amsterdam in particular, the security system is considered very strong.
They take it very seriously. They spend the money to do it right. They've been pioneers in a number of areas of security. They come as close to doing it as right as anybody I know.
And it's not just enhanced security he faces. Because Abdulmutallab is flying to Detroit, his journey would face live online interaction with the US authorities for the first time. Post 9/11, all flights to the US have been treated as prime terrorist targets.
I wouldn't say I was completely relaxed. I was just maybe a little bit nervous. I'm often a bit nervous on an American airliner flying to America. I was really surprised. I thought in flying on Christmas Day, I thought it would be rather quiet, but it was very crowded.
Passengers for Northwest Flight 253 start queuing for security, unaware that one of their fellow passengers is a committed terrorist.
I was traveling from Mumbai and I'm visiting India with my family. I was very excited. After 5 weeks, everybody likes to come home, and it was Christmas Day. I was very excited to meet my family members.
Abdulmutallab is required by international accord to go through security yet again.
The US demands that all passengers flying to the States face extra questioning by security personnel employed by the Dutch authorities. It's a professional, one-on-one grilling designed to blow a terrorist's cover story.
He's already traveled for 11 hours. He's probably tired. He's also probably increasingly nervous. He's basically a novice at this.
This is the last line of defense. And this is the place where you absolutely have to stop the guy who has intent.
If there's going to be a time that he's going to stumble, this is probably the moment.
While they're asking the questions, they are looking for reactions from the person.
He's facing questions about, where is he going and what is he doing?
Might be a question as to why he was carrying no coat with him when he's going to a cold destination, why he's got so limited baggage on him. It's not going down that checklist and just ticking boxes, but actually digging a little bit deeper if there's even the slightest suspicion that somebody may not be as clean as would appear.
Al-Qaeda intensively train their operatives in preparation for this, the toughest moment of their mission.
They looked at his passport, they asked him questions, they looked at his visas, they looked him in the eye, which they're trained to do, and he was able to convince those people that he was not a threat.
Abdul Muttalib passed his biggest test. But, according to a fellow passenger, after more than an hour spent on the ground at Schiphol, he was struggling to maintain his composure.
I was looking around. There's a strange guy standing. His right hand was on his forehead, and he was like looking nervous. So I was thinking something is strange or weird looking, this guy. I wanted to say to somebody, but then I said, this is not my job, this is a security job, so I let it go.
As the passengers check in for Northwest Airlines Flight 253, information that Abdul Muttalib was about to board an American plane was winging its way around the globe to US officials. After check-in and up to 30 minutes before the plane departs, airlines flying to the States must submit details of all passengers to the National Targeting Center. One of the NTC's jobs is to check passenger names against watch lists of individuals who might pose a direct threat to the US. A month earlier, his father had warned the CIA that his son might be mixing with Islamic extremists. Although it wasn't considered enough to revoke Abdul Muttalib's US visa, his name was added to a counter-terrorism database of people thought to pose a low-level threat.
Abdul Muttalib's name, because of what his father had reported, appeared on the broad terrorist identities data mart environment, the TIDE database. That's almost 600,000 individuals at this point. That's the grand radar screen of suspect individuals.
It's a hodgepodge of people. It could be something as simple as you once before had crossed the border into the United States from Mexico and were carrying some food that was prohibited, and therefore you were put into TIDE.
The National Targeting Center don't routinely check the TIDE list before boarding. For them to stop Abdul Muttalib getting on Flight 253, he would have to be on the toughest list of all, the no-fly list.
The no-fly list, the most selective of these lists that are public, is a list of about 4,000 individuals. We have enough information about these individuals to suggest that they are a direct danger to the aircraft.
The no-fly list is just what it says on the tin. It's a list of individuals who are not allowed to fly, for whatever the reason that might be, and primarily that reason is their connection with terrorism.
Abdul Muttalib was on a list for the U.S. government, but it wasn't the no-fly list, which would have disallowed his boarding of the flight to the United States.
The no-fly list doesn't just protect those traveling to and from the US. It is shared with most international airports. The National Targeting Center cleared all 279 passengers to board Flight 253.